The impact echoed across the school parking lot like a gunshot. 4:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, and Elena Martinez found herself sprawled across the hot asphalt, blood trickling from her scraped knee as her torn backpack spilled notebooks and pens in every direction. 20 students immediately pulled out their phones, recording the moment Blake Henderson, 6'2" quarterback with perfectly styled blonde hair, stood over the 17-year-old girl with a satisfied smirk. But Elena didn't cry. She didn't scream for help. Instead, her dark eyes swept methodically across the parking lot, noting the security camera positioned at the northwest corner, calculating angles and timestamps. She pressed her palms against the rough pavement and pushed herself up with deliberate control, never breaking eye contact with Blake. "In 8 minutes, you're going to regret this," she said quietly, her voice carrying a strange authority that made several onlookers lower their phones slightly. The way she stood wasn't like a victim. It was like a soldier surveying a battlefield. Blake laughed, the sound harsh and entitled. "Right. What are you going to do? Charity case? Call your mommy?" He gestured to his crew of followers. "Newsflash, nobody cares about scholarship kids who don't know their place." Elena straightened her torn jacket, her movements precise and measured. There was something different about the new girl who'd transferred to Riverside High 3 weeks ago, something that didn't quite fit the profile of a typical high school student. While other kids fumbled with standard smartphones, Elena's device showed unusual wear patterns along the edges, subtle modifications that suggested professional-grade recording equipment. Her posture, too, was distinctive. She never sat with her back to a door, always positioned herself with clear sight lines to exits, and maintained the kind of situational awareness that spoke to training most teenagers never received. "One party consent recording," Elena said casually, slipping the modified phone into her jacket pocket. "Colorado Revised Statutes, Section 18-9-111. Interesting how few people understand the legal implications." Blake's smirk faltered slightly. Most high school students didn't casually reference state statutes. "What are you talking about? Nothing you need to worry about," Elena replied, but her fingers were already moving across her phone screen with practiced efficiency. The crowd around them was growing larger. Taylor Morrison, Blake's usual sidekick and the daughter of a prominent local business owner, stepped forward with her own phone raised. "This is going to be epic," she announced to her followers. "Charity girl thinks she can threaten Blake Henderson." Marcus Williams, a quiet junior who'd been loading his bicycle nearby, watched the confrontation with growing unease. He'd seen Blake's crew target other students before, but something about Elena's calm demeanor was unsettling. She wasn't reacting like previous victims. The 5-minute warning bell echoed across campus, signaling the shift change for security personnel. Elena noted the sound with a slight nod, as if she'd been counting down to that exact moment. "You know what your problem is?" Blake said, stepping closer to Elena. The height difference was significant. He towered over her 5'4" frame. "You think because you got some pity scholarship, you belong here. But this isn't your world, Elena. You're just visiting." "Charity case," Taylor chimed in, starting to type rapidly on her phone. "Let's make sure everyone knows exactly what we think about scholarship kids who don't show proper respect." Within minutes, Blake had created a group chat called Charity Watch and begun posting manipulated photos of Elena with degrading captions. The posts were designed for maximum humiliation, mocking her second-hand clothes, her work-study job in the library, and her status as what Blake termed academic welfare. Elena watched the posts multiply across social media with the same clinical detachment she'd shown throughout the confrontation. While other students would have been devastated by the public humiliation, she was documenting everything, The timestamps, the usernames, the digital trail that Blake and his followers were creating with each cruel post. As she moved through the cafeteria later that day, Elena's movements seemed choreographed for a different purpose. She consistently transferred her food tray to her left hand when navigating crowded areas, keeping her dominant hand free. Her route to tables followed the walls rather than cutting through open spaces. Small details that went unnoticed by her classmates, but would have been immediately recognizable to anyone with tactical training. "All right, let me take a moment here," Elena said, looking directly into one of the still-recording phones. "Nếu ban tung chung kiên kan bat nat như thế này. Hãy nhấn like để ủng hộ những ai đang đón trend. Và đừng quên subscribe để theo dõi những câu chuyện đầy cảm hứng về lòng dũng cảm." Nút thanks ở dưới giúp chúng mình tiếp tục mang đến những câu chuyện ý nghĩa. Giờ hãy xem Elena sẽ xử lý tình huống này như thế nào. The students around her exchanged confused glances. Elena's bilingual commentary and direct address to cameras suggested a level of media sophistication that didn't match her supposed background as a struggling scholarship student. Blake was too focused on his social media victory to notice the inconsistencies. "Did you just?" Elena looked directly at him. "I know things about camera systems, legal procedures, and documentation requirements that most students don't typically learn in high school," she said evenly. "The question you should be asking is why." Her phone buzzed with an incoming message from a number with no contact name saved. The preview showed only 2 words: "Package confirmed." Elena glanced at the message and deleted it immediately, but not before Marcus caught a glimpse of the military-style formatting. "The thing about Riverside High," Elena continued, "is that everything is tracked. The RFID entry system logs every student's movements throughout campus, time-stamped, geo-locked. The district implemented it as part of their safety protocol after that incident in Jefferson County 2 years ago." Blake's confidence was starting to crack. "How do you know about—" "I know a lot of things," Elena interrupted. "For instance, did you know that Title IX requires schools to address hostile environments that interfere with a student's educational access, or that there are federal statutes specifically addressing conspiracy to deprive someone of their civil rights under color of institutional authority?" The crowd had gone quiet. This wasn't the response they'd expected from a supposed scholarship kid being bullied by the most powerful student in school. Elena reached into her backpack and withdrew what appeared to be a standard digital recorder, but the device had modifications that caught Marcus's attention. The housing showed signs of professional-grade construction, with reinforced casing and what looked like military spec connectors. This wasn't consumer electronics from the local store. This recording device, Elena explained to no one in particular, features timestamp authentication that holds up in legal proceedings, encrypted storage that prevents tampering, and forensic recovery capabilities that law enforcement agencies rely on for evidence collection. It's not exactly standard high school equipment, but it's very effective for documenting patterns of harassment and institutional negligence. Taylor's phone slipped from her suddenly nervous fingers. "What are you talking about? You're just trying to scare us." "No," Elena said calmly. "I'm documenting everything. The question is whether you want to be part of the problem or part of the solution." In the distance, the sound of emergency vehicle sirens began to echo across the campus, growing steadily louder. Blake tried to regain control of the situation. "Listen, you psycho. I don't know what kind of weird fantasy you're living in, but my dad runs this school district. One phone call and you're gone. Back to whatever trailer park you crawled out of." Elena's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. The submissive victim Blake had expected was nowhere to be found. In her place stood someone with the bearing of a person accustomed to conflict, trained in de-escalation, and utterly unimpressed by teenage power plays. Let me explain something about Colorado state law, Elena said, her voice taking on the measured tone of someone quoting legal precedent. Section 18-9-111 specifically addresses unlawful intimidation. When you combine that with the federal civil rights implications of targeting someone based on their economic status within an educational environment, you're looking at potential federal involvement. She pulled out a laptop from her damaged backpack, noting the cracked screen where Blake's initial shove had sent it flying. Elena photographed the damage from 3 different angles, each image automatically time-stamped and geotagged by the device's integrated systems. Documentation is everything, she explained matter-of-factly. Time, date, location, witnesses, physical evidence, chain of custody matters when you're building a case that needs to hold up under scrutiny. Marcus stepped forward hesitantly. Elena, maybe you should. He stopped mid-sentence, noticing something that made his eyes widen. When Elena had rolled up her sleeves to examine her scraped arms, a small portion of what looked like a military-style tattoo had become visible just above her wrist. It was partially concealed by her watch, but the distinctive angular design was unmistakable to anyone familiar with service branch insignia. Blake was growing increasingly agitated. You think you're smart with all this legal talk? You think your little recorder is going to save you? He gestured to his friends. There are more of us than you. And when it comes down to your word against ours, guess who people are going to believe? That's the beautiful thing about evidence, Elena replied. It doesn't require anyone to believe anything. It simply exists. She moved with fluid precision to a different position in the hallway, one that provided optimal sight lines to multiple security cameras. The movement was so natural that it took Marcus a moment to realize she'd essentially triangulated herself for maximum visual documentation from 3 different angles. Blake, realizing he was losing control of the narrative, decided to escalate. You know what? I'm tired of talking. He stepped forward aggressively, raising his hand as if to push Elena again. Elena didn't flinch. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly, adjusted her footing, and waited. The movement was subtle, but precisely calculated for defensive positioning. When Blake's hand moved toward her, Elena simply redirected the motion with minimal contact, using his own momentum to guide him past her and into the lockers behind. To observers, it looked like Blake had simply missed his target and stumbled. But Marcus, watching carefully, recognized the controlled precision of someone with formal training in conflict management. Interesting technique, Marcus said quietly. Elena glanced at him with what might have been approval. Physics, she said simply. Applied correctly, it's very effective. Blake regained his balance, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. You're going to pay for that, he snarled, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. The easy victim he'd expected was demonstrating capabilities that didn't match her supposed background. Taylor tried to salvage the situation by getting closer with her phone camera. This is all being recorded, she announced triumphantly. Everyone's going to see how you attacked Blake. Perfect, Elena said. Make sure you get good angles. Documentation from multiple sources helps establish a complete timeline. The emergency sirens that had been distant background noise were getting closer now, and Elena checked her watch with the same calm precision she'd shown throughout the confrontation. Marcus, she said, turning to the only witness who hadn't participated in the harassment. I need you to remember exactly what you've seen here today. Times, actions, statements. Can you do that? Marcus nodded, still processing the surreal turn the situation had taken. Yeah, I think so. But Elena, who are you really? Before Elena could answer, Blake's phone buzzed with an incoming direct message. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale. This isn't possible, he muttered. What's wrong? Taylor demanded, trying to see his phone. Blake showed her the message, and her expression shifted from confusion to fear. The message was simple but specific. Harassment documented. Legal review initiated. Cease all contact immediately. "Who sent this?" Taylor whispered. Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the caller ID, which showed only the word handler before the call was disconnected after exactly one ring. "Wrong number," Elena said casually, but her fingers were already moving to delete the call log. Marcus had caught the brief glimpse of the contact name, and pieces of a very different puzzle were starting to fall into place. Handler wasn't typically how high school students labeled their contacts. The emergency sirens were now unmistakably close, and the sound of heavy boots echoing through the hallway suggested something far more serious than a typical school disciplinary issue was about to unfold. Elena straightened her damaged clothing and gathered her scattered belongings with methodical calm. "Blake," she said, looking directly at him, "you have about 30 seconds to decide whether you want to be part of a solution or become a case study in how privilege doesn't protect you from consequences." The sound of approaching footsteps was getting louder, and the measured rhythm suggested military precision rather than civilian urgency. Blake and Taylor exchanged nervous glances, suddenly aware that their afternoon of entertainment had somehow transformed into something far more serious than they'd bargained for. Elena checked her watch one final time and nodded with satisfaction. 8 minutes, she said quietly. Right on schedule. The double doors at the end of the hallway burst open with military precision. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez stepped through the entrance, his desert camouflage uniform crisp and bearing the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. His black combat boots struck the linoleum floor with measured steps that echoed through the suddenly silent corridor. Blake's confident smirk evaporated instantly. Taylor's phone trembled in her hands as she lowered it, recognizing that whatever was happening had escalated far beyond typical high school drama. "Elena," the sergeant said, his voice carrying the controlled tone of professional concern. "Status report. Documented harassment escalating to physical assault, Sergeant Rodriguez," Elena replied, her posture straightening into something that resembled military bearing. "Multiple witnesses, digital evidence secured, institutional negligence confirmed." Marcus felt his understanding of the situation shift completely. This wasn't a scholarship student being bullied. This was something else entirely. Blake stammered, Who are you?" Sergeant Rodriguez's eyes moved systematically across the scene, taking in Elena's torn clothing, her scraped knee, the scattered contents of her backpack, and the crowd of students still holding recording devices. His gaze settled on Blake with the kind of intensity that made grown men uncomfortable. "I'm Military Family Readiness Liaison for Jefferson County School District," Rodriguez said, producing an official identification card. "When military dependents report systematic harassment within educational institutions, it becomes a federal concern under the Military Family Life Protection Act." Elena rolled up her damaged sleeve further, revealing the full military dependent identification tattoo that had been partially visible earlier. The design incorporated her father's unit insignia, a special operations designation that Marcus recognized from news coverage of overseas deployments. "My assignment," Elena said, addressing the crowd with the same calm authority she'd maintained throughout the confrontation, "was to investigate reports of systematic harassment and institutional cover-up within this district. What you've witnessed today represents 3 weeks of documented evidence gathering." She pulled out a tablet device that clearly wasn't standard student equipment. The screen displayed a sophisticated interface, showing real-time connections to legal databases, district policy documents, and case precedent files that automatically cross-referenced relevant statutes and violations. This system provides immediate access to federal education law, civil rights statutes, and military dependent protection protocols, Elena explained, demonstrating the device's capabilities. It enables real-time legal analysis and evidence documentation that holds up in federal court proceedings. Taylor's voice cracked as she spoke. "This is insane. You're just a student. You can't do this to us." "Actually," Elena said, consulting her tablet, "under Title IX and the Equal Educational Opportunities Act, students have specific protections against hostile educational environments. When those protections are systematically ignored by institutional authorities, federal oversight becomes mandatory." Blake tried to regain some semblance of control. "My father will hear about this. He'll have both of you removed from this district." Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward slightly. "Your father is welcome to contact the district attorney's office, which is currently reviewing evidence of conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of institutional authority. Or he can reach out to the FBI's Civil Rights Division, which opened a preliminary investigation yesterday based on our reports." "Yesterday?" Blake's voice went up an octave. Elena nodded. "The direct messages you sent containing specific threats triggered automatic reporting protocols. Federal law requires immediate notification when military dependents face targeted harassment that includes threats of physical harm." Marcus watched Blake's face cycle through confusion, fear, and desperate calculation. "But my dad, he's on the school board. He has connections." "Connections don't override federal jurisdiction," Sergeant Rodriguez replied matter-of-factly. "When institutional authority is used to enable harassment of protected individuals, those connections become evidence of conspiracy rather than protection." The tablet in Elena's hands chimed softly, and she glanced at the screen. "Attendance modification detected in the district database. Someone just attempted to alter my attendance records to create a false narrative about today's events." Blake's face went pale. He glanced at Taylor, who was staring at her phone in horror. "That's impossible," Taylor whispered. "Nobody knows your login credentials." "Actually," Elena said, holding up a small device that Marcus hadn't noticed before, "Keylogger software is surprisingly easy to install when you have physical access to computers. Administrative passwords aren't as secure as people think." She turned to Sergeant Rodriguez. "We have digital evidence of academic records manipulation, systematic harassment, conspiracy to deny civil rights, and attempted evidence tampering. The pattern extends across multiple incidents involving different students over the past 2 academic years." "Holy cow," Marcus muttered, finally understanding the scope of what he'd witnessed. Sergeant Rodriguez nodded grimly. "The investigation revealed that this isn't isolated to Riverside High. We've identified similar patterns at 3 other schools in the district, all involving students whose families lack the political connections necessary to challenge institutional negligence." Blake's hands were visibly shaking now. "This is nonsense. You can't prove any of this. It's your word against ours." "Actually," Elena said, connecting her tablet to the hallway's public address system with practiced efficiency, "let me share some of the evidence we've collected." Audio began playing through the school's speakers' recordings of Blake and his friends planning harassment campaigns, discussing how to manipulate academic records, and explicitly targeting students based on their economic status and family backgrounds. The recordings included conversations with Taylor about creating fake social media accounts to spread humiliating content about scholarship students. Blake's voice could be heard clearly discussing how his father's position on the school board made him untouchable and how they could destroy any student who challenged their authority. "Sound familiar?" Elena asked conversationally. Taylor was now crying openly. We didn't mean for it to go this far. It was just supposed to be fun. Systematic harassment isn't fun, Sergeant Rodriguez said firmly. It's a federal crime when it involves conspiracy to deny someone their civil rights within an educational environment. The hallway had filled with additional school personnel, including Principal Williams and District Superintendent Carter, both looking increasingly uncomfortable as they realized the scope of what was unfolding. Ms. Martinez, Principal Williams began hesitantly, perhaps we can resolve this matter internally through our existing disciplinary— No, Elena interrupted, her voice carrying absolute finality. Internal resolution had 3 weeks to work. 17 separate incident reports were filed with this administration. All were dismissed or ignored. Federal oversight is no longer optional. It's mandatory. She gestured to Sergeant Rodriguez, who produced official-looking documents from his uniform pocket. Blake Henderson and Taylor Morrison, you're under federal arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of institutional authority, systematic harassment of military dependents, and tampering with educational records. As federal agents who had been waiting outside entered the building and began reading Blake and Taylor their rights, Elena felt a complex mix of emotions. The satisfaction of seeing justice served was tempered by sadness for how far the situation had been allowed to escalate. You know, she said to Marcus, who was still processing everything he'd witnessed, none of this had to happen. If the system had worked the way it was supposed to work, if adults had done their jobs, if institutional authority had been used to protect rather than enable, this could have been resolved with proper disciplinary action and policy changes. Marcus nodded slowly. So what happens now? Elena consulted her tablet one final time. The FBI investigation will expand to include all Jefferson County schools. New federal oversight protocols will be implemented, and hopefully, other students won't have to go through what happened here. She paused, looking at the crowd of students who had recorded the entire confrontation. But mostly, people need to understand that systematic harassment has consequences. Real consequences that money and connections can't make disappear. As Blake and Taylor were escorted from the building in federal custody, Elena received a new message on her tablet. The sender was listed only as command, and the content was brief. Assignment complete. New placement authorized. Report for briefing Thursday 0800 hours. Elena showed the message to Sergeant Rodriguez, who nodded approvingly. Another school? He asked. Another state, Elena replied. Apparently, systematic harassment of military families is more widespread than anyone realized. Marcus stepped closer. Elena, I have to ask, who are you really? Elena gathered her belongings, addressing younger students watching nearby. Documentation matters. Evidence matters. Nobody has the right to make your educational environment hostile, regardless of connections. Federal vehicles departed with Blake and Taylor in custody. As Elena climbed into Sergeant Rodriguez's military vehicle, she reflected on the completed assignment. Somewhere else, another student needed protection. Marcus watched them leave, understanding that justice had prevailed over privilege. Sometimes the quiet new student was exactly who you needed.
The story ends here, but there are many more videos waiting for you. So, if you enjoy, please take a moment to like, subscribe to the Wrong Target Story channel, and don't forget to turn on the bell. See you in the next story.